Robert M. Stanley, Bell's chief engineer, then chief test pilot, who had supervised the test program, was at the controls. As the airplane set out for its first test flight, it carried with it the hopes and confidence of the men who built it. But would it achieve the great promise they had foreseen in this new type of power? The success of this flight would have an important bearing on further progress in jet propulsion. The first test hop was 25 feet off the ground. Everything in order. With the control response good and the handling qualities proven, the airplane was ready for higher altitudes. It was taken to 6,000 feet, then 10,000, and then on up. The date was October 1st, 1942, a day which marked an important achievement in American aviation progress. In the short space of 1 year and 3 weeks, the complex problems involved in the design and construction of this revolutionary new airplane had been surmounted. In its first flights, it had achieved performance comparable with that of existing fighter aircraft. But of far greater importance was the impetus it was to give to future development. With jet propulsion proven first in Great Britain and now in the United States, its development on both sides of the Atlantic continued with all possible speed. Data on characteristics and performance of the engine were the first considerations, and features of the airframe were studied for further improvements and refinements. Production continued at General Electric and Bell, and soon other airplanes were added to the first. There were no allowances in this intensive program for delays. When rains made the base unsuitable for flying, the airplane was camouflaged with a dummy propeller to maintain secrecy, and the project transported to a nearby field where the collection of vital performance data could be continued. As additional airplanes were completed, they were designated for varied test purposes. One was shipped to the Royal Air Force in England, and by such constant interchange was the development of jet propulsion furthered by both nations. 2 more P-59s were earmarked for full-scale wind tunnel tests at the NACA laboratories at Cleveland and Langley Field. Here, the engines underwent high-speed test runs, and the airplane's aerodynamic characteristics were carefully studied. The data collected here in 6 months of testing were added to the growing fund of knowledge, which was to provide a basis for the expanding jet propulsion program in this country. 2 P-59s were also assigned to the Bureau of Aeronautics of the United States Navy so that the features of this new aircraft could be studied and evaluated for their purposes. Keenly interested in the possibilities of jet propulsion as a means for powering naval fighter aircraft, officials witnessed at a Navy experimental flight test base a demonstration of the performance characteristics of this type of power and its adaptability for the special requirements of carrier-based aircraft. Included in the demonstration were high-speed test runs, so that data could be assembled on the performance of jet propulsion as compared with other types of power for fighter airplanes. In this first airplane in the United States to be powered solely by jet propulsion, there was great interest as to the details of its operation. Here, as everywhere, pilots wanted to know how the new airplane got its power. The explanation usually boiled down to something like this. Remember back in high school when you studied elementary physics? Remember Newton's third law of motion? To every action, there is always an equal and opposite reaction. How it applies can be illustrated with a toy balloon. The energy which is used to blow up the balloon is stored inside it in the form of pressure. This pressure acts with equal force all around the balloon as long as it remains closed. When the neck is opened, however, the forces acting on that end cause the air to rush out through the opening. The opposing forces are no longer balanced and they react, propelling the balloon in the opposite direction. This propulsive force is created by two elements, pressure and velocity. In thermal jet propulsion, the energy which in the balloon was supplied by the boy is here created by combustion of fuel and oxygen, producing the necessary pressure and velocity. The parts of a jet engine are a cold air inlet and diffuser, a mechanical compressor which compresses the air, a series of burners where the oxygen of the air is combined with fuel and is ignited. There is a ring of these burners around the entire circumference of the engine. A turbine which takes some of the power out of the escaping gases to drive the compressor by means of a shaft. And a tailpipe which conveys the gases to the jet nozzle. Air traveling at a velocity equal to the speed of the airplane approaches the inlet. Inside, it loses some of its speed but picks up in pressure. Drawn into the compressor, the air is highly compressed. In the burners, this air is sprayed with fuel and ignited. The intense heat generated causes the gases thus formed to expand rapidly with great force, and they rush to escape, gaining terrific velocity. Part of the power of the escaping gases is used to rotate the turbine, which in turn drives the compressor. The remaining power further increases the velocity of the gases so they blast out through the jet nozzle. This, then, is the action of the heat, pressure, and velocity. The reaction is the movement of the airplane forward. This method of aircraft propulsion presents many advantages. With no reciprocating engine movement, the airplane is remarkably free from vibration. Propeller torque is completely lacking, and in the P-59, with its two jets so close to the center line, single engine performance presents no problems. Highly significant in surmounting present aircraft limitations is the fact that at the extreme altitudes and speeds where propeller-driven airplanes begin to drop off in efficiency, jet propulsion characteristically becomes more and more efficient. The jet engine is lighter and simpler than conventional engines, with only 10% the number of moving parts. The absence of propellers makes possible a shorter and lighter landing gear. This, together with a low center of gravity, due to engine placement, makes for safer landings and better ground handling characteristics. This airplane incorporates a pressurized cabin for maximum pilot efficiency at high altitudes. In the cabin are the usual stick and rudder pedals for the control of the airplane, but noticeably absent are various instruments needed with conventional engines. Simple push buttons start the engines, which are regulated by means of standard throttles. These many advantages of jet propulsion promised important possibilities for aviation's future, but of immediate value were its military applications for a nation at war. On January 26, 1944, the Army's Chief of Staff, General George C. Marshall, General H.H. Arnold, Commanding General of the Army Air Forces, the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, Admiral Ernest A. King, Major General B.W. Chidlaw, and Lord Halifax, the British Ambassador, together with a select group of those most vitally concerned with the immediate development of jet propulsion, assembled at Bowling Field to witness a demonstration of the P-59A. A survey was presented by General Chidlaw of the advances achieved in this first American jet-propelled airplane. He related the progression of events in its design, building, and subsequent testing, and summarized the results of the experimentation which it made possible. After being briefed on the airplane's principal features, those present saw a demonstration of its flight characteristics. After the demonstration, the airplane was made available for closer scrutiny so that they could learn at first hand more about the adaptability of this type of airplane for military use. To the leaders of our armed forces, this innovation presented a concept in air power which could have an important effect upon the airplane's role in future war strategy. To realize this expected military value as quickly as possible, more engines and more airplanes were needed for continued expansion of the jet propulsion program. At General Electric, production requirements had become so extensive that a new plant was especially constructed for this program. In contrast to that first improvised engine test cell, there was now a battery of well-equipped test bays where the newly completed engines were run up for the first time and given complete operational checks. In spite of this expansion, secrecy precautions were still rigidly adhered to. At Bell, the production technique which had speeded the manufacture of its other fighter planes was adopted for the new airplane. The entire operation had been moved from the secret shop where the prototype had been built to a restricted area in the main factory. Here, additional airplanes were rushed to completion for the many important purposes they could serve. With these aircraft, the Air Forces was equipping the first group for training pilots in the fighting tactics of jet-propelled aircraft. Well suited to this program were the P-59s, with their safety record of thousands of hours flown during the testing program without pilot injury. Of even greater value was the P-59's importance in the advancement of jet propulsion itself. With its twin engines, it was ideally suited to the extensive testing being conducted in the nation's program, which began with the development of this airplane. Initiated by the Army Air Forces, this project was supervised by Brigadier General Frank Carroll, Chief Engineering Division, Air Technical Service Command. He and many others, Air Force officers, engineers, and pilots, working constantly together, were largely responsible for this first American jet propulsion airplane. The P-59 Airacomet had achieved in a short span of months performance comparable to that of advanced conventional airplanes developed over a period of many years. But its accomplishments are secondary to the broader achievements which it portends. In its production, the Bell Aircraft Corporation has pioneered in a new type aircraft which is certain to be closely allied with the expanding frontiers of aviation. Both in Great Britain and in the United States, the work of further development has been greatly accelerated. The story of jet propulsion is the story of progress, and in this first chapter, the P-59 is but an introduction. Still largely unexplored, the potentialities of this new concept for aircraft power seem endless. Its promise for the future of aviation almost unlimited.